When it comes to the field of personal development, there are two words that I have a visceral disdain for. Two words that I think are greatly overused, are posted all over the place as part of positive memes. And I think it's time to look more deeply at them and to discuss, are they really useful? The two words are authentic self. And people post, you should be your authentic self. And how do we become our authentic self? And so on. Is it toxic positivity on steroids? Is there any value in it at all? I invited hypnotist and mental fitness coach Nicole Mazzucato to come on and discuss with me. What do we think of this phrase, authentic self? Is it really just toxic positivity gone mad? Or is there some merit in it? Hello, my name's Howard Cooper, and for almost 20 years I've been helping people to become free from anxiety. As an ex-anxiety sufferer myself, I know only too well the suffering that's involved and how important it is to get really good quality anxiety beating tips into your hands. So that's what this channel is all about, and if that's the sort of stuff that appeals to you, then make sure you click subscribe so that you never miss an episode. So let's dive in to this conversation about authentic selves, and let's see whether Nicole has anything to say about it. Is there any value in it at all, or am I just missing something?
It has just become one of those sort of catchphrases, hasn't it? That sort of gets bounced around all over the place, all over social media. And obviously with the work, social media the way it is today, we're all journalists, aren't we? We've all got, our opinion and our way of getting it out there and getting it seen by the world. But I do think it's something that's being thrown around very loosely. And like anything, it's open to interpretation. It doesn't matter what word or what kind of collection of words we put out there. Everybody's going to interpret this in their own way. But I do think it's, I don't know how helpful it is as a phrase, because I don't know how many people actually understand what it's supposed to mean. Does that make sense?
It does, and I'm curious, what do you take it as supposed to mean?
Okay, so for me, being your authentic self is about being in connection with yourself, with your feelings, with what's happening with you, with how you feel, and really kind of connecting to that, being able to recognize that, being able to name that, and being able to honor and respect that, and almost live from that place. I don't know why I'm waving a pencil around, it's just comfortable. I'll put it down. Just
Go for it.
living from that place. So and what I mean by that, I've learned a lot about this from meditation, mindfulness. One particular teacher, Tara Brach, talks a lot about this, and at the moment I'm listening to a book of hers called Radical Acceptance, which I highly recommend. She also has a meditation called RAIN, which you can find on her website and you can find on YouTube. And the acronym RAIN stands for Recognize, Allow, Investigate, Nurture. So it is very much about coming inside, coming within yourself and paying attention to what's going on in the body, because really if emotions are energy in motion. That's what comes up when we have an emotional response to something, whether it's happiness, sadness, anger, joy, whatever it is, it's manifested in a physiological way.
I have some thinking around the whole authentic self thing, and I understand that there is an element, or it could be interpreted as like being honest with oneself, or coming from a place of self-honesty, to be congruent and to not have inner conflict. So if there's an example, like, my daughter doesn't want to go somewhere because she, why do we have to come up with an excuse of why she shouldn't go there? Like, why can't we just say she doesn't really fancy going?
Yeah.
And coming from that place of just brutal honesty. And that's, a good idea of authentic self. But one of my issues, as I've explored it just a little bit further, and it didn't kind of sit right. There was something about it which implies that you're not being authentic if you have inner conflict. And it's this idea that actually, isn't it very human to have inner conflict as well? Like, I could just be someone that feels like I want to do one thing, but also has some reticence and, or I want to hide the real reason why I'm doing something. And I'm just one of those people. I'm still being me. I'm not being anyone else. I'm just unlucky in that I have the neurology of someone that has some conflict and feels like I want to fit in. And who are we to say that that's not being authentic either?
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And conflict is we all have conflict on some level. I mean, you and I know very well the idea of parts in hypnosis, and that there are multiple parts to our psyche, if you like, multiple aspects. And we're not talking about multiple personality dissociation or anything like that. We're talking about, and we in our language, we refer to ourselves in that way anyway, naturally. It's like, well, there's a part of me that really wants to sit on the sofa and do nothing tonight, and there's another part of me that wants to go out with my friends and have a beer. We refer to ourselves in that way. And I've spoken to plenty of people that speak other languages, and they all say it's the same, that we speak about ourselves as in these multiple parts. And in that example that I just gave, which part is going to win that battle? Whichever part is screaming loudest, really. Whichever part is sort of pulling on the strings the hardest. And that's the part that's going to win. But that's a conflict. And we are constantly having conflicts arise within us. That's not really about being authentic or not. For me, the authenticity comes into, can I take a moment to be silent and to understand those different parts of myself, and to hear those two different voices and be like, oh, that's interesting. There's a conflict going on here. I wonder if I can sort of just allow that to be, and maybe just investigate it a little bit, not judging it, not trying to change it, not trying to manipulate it, but just get to know it.
And without playing devil's advocate, and by that I mean by playing devil's advocate.
Yes.
What if you were just someone who doesn't have the insight or the psychological awareness to recognize conflict? Are we saying that they're not being their authentic selves?
No.
That they could just be someone that has zero insight or doesn't think psychologically. And I think my problem with this framing of authentic self is that there's almost a superiority about it. There are some people who are just, they are their authentic selves. And if you're not being your authentic self, you're somehow, not as, oh God, I'm going to use the word, aren't I? Not as woke.
Not as woke.
They don't have this need to they don't even think about, am I my authentic self? They're just being.
Yeah. And do you know what? Many times in my life, it's a bit like you open, once you gain knowledge, there's no getting rid of it, right? There's no kind of, I don't know, you see something in your life and you can't erase that from your mind, in a sense. Do you know what I mean? And once you start opening certain doors and learning certain things, you may or may not agree with it. You may totally agree with it for your whole life, and then suddenly see something else. And that kind of just makes you disagree with all of this stuff that you've been learning for previously. So I'm not saying that, but when you start opening doors, and especially doors of knowledge, and learning, it's very difficult to close those doors. And I sometimes in my life have just sat down and thought, God, wouldn't ignorance be bliss in this context?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be lovely to not have opened those doors? But that wasn't my path. My path was that I needed to open those doors. I needed to go on a massive journey of self-development, personal growth, inner, what's the word? Connecting with what I have inside me. And I'm still on that journey. I'm still learning. I don't think that journey is ever complete, right? At least not until you die. Or I die. I'm not you.
I was going to say, it's like Nicole will finally find out who she is on my death. It's a really weird metric.
Yeah. But for me, that's not a journey that ends.
Well, no, I mean, you use the phrase about looking inside and having growth inside. That reminds me, I think, you hear about so many people going away, they sort of leave school and they go, I'm going traveling to find myself, as though themselves are out there.
Yes.
But, and it's very common, isn't it, that people at a certain age, they go, I need to find myself, and they go different places. But the one place they don't go is looking inwards. They tend to... But I think that's true in many cases of lots of people with all sorts of issues, that they're often, I mean, they think they're out there, but also that the problem's out there. I had someone last night who I saw who was very much about, I don't know why I'm here. It's my husband. It's him. He needs to change. And we're very good at pointing outwards. And in that same way, we're very good at going places to find things that we really should be looking inwards for.
Yeah, I recently did a few posts and wrote my newsletter on how it's not you, it's me, you know, and how when you're getting irritated by somebody, it's exactly that. I'm the one that's getting irritated. It's not because they are irritating. It's me that's getting irritated. So what is it in me that's getting irritated by that person? Rather than saying, you're irritating, you're annoying, can you go away? It's much more difficult to say, actually, they're just being them. They have no idea, probably, what they're doing is irritating me and pissing me off. But I am the one that and again, this is hard. This is not work that everybody is ready to do, and that's okay. It's hard. It's so much harder to say, no, it's me. I'm the one that's getting irritated, rather than pointing the finger and saying, you're irritating. You're just an irritating human. Can you go away? And my irritation will go away. Because it's kind of like, you go away, my irritation will go away, but it's going to come back when somebody else who's irritating is in my space. But it is so much harder to say, no, it's me, it's not you. And having a look in, kind of making that connection with ourselves, because we have talked about this before. As a society, we are trained to be disconnected from ourselves. We are trained as children. Don't be sad, don't be angry, stop laughing, stop crying, don't be too happy. It's inappropriate to be happy at this moment, oh, you mustn't giggle there, even if it's a nervous giggle or something like that. No, you mustn't do that. You've got to shove all of that down, push it all down, keep pushing it down, and then put a lid really tight on that jar. And so what happens? We have no idea how we feel when kind of things happen and things arise. We're completely unaware of what anger, the purpose of anger is, or how to even manage it or deal with it. So we don't really know what's happening with us. Yeah. And that's a society-wide problem.
It is. And it's interesting that it's this idea of trying to get rid of anything that's uncomfortable. And I think we're robbing children of being able to have resilience in terms of understanding that it's okay sometimes to have emotions and to feel down or to feel bad. And a really good example of this is a rise in what I would call, toxic positivity, which I think is my issue with it's when toxic positivity meets authentic self. That's really what I rail against. That's really what triggers me, where okay, there's nothing wrong inherently with talking about being authentic or looking at being self-honest or acknowledging inner conflict. But when it's used as a weapon in the battle of, we mustn't feel anything bad ever, so that we can always, and I've talked about this on this channel before, but there's this sort of class of people. I couldn't possibly tell you whether I've met any of them or not before. But they sort of say things like, when life gives you lemons, you don't just make lemonade, you make super sparkly, glittery lemonade. And it's like this sickening having to oh, look, my whole family died, but what am I going to learn from this? Don't worry, I'm going to feel wonderful. It's like, well, you don't have to, because something bad's happened. And no, I'm going to be fine. And it's through gritted teeth, and these are the people that are so deeply terrified of their own internal experience of anything negative that it's almost, it holds them back. I think they become deeply afraid, and now they have to avoid anything that could put anything negative in their brain. And that lid is going to come off eventually and explode. And they're not going to be able to cope because they haven't given themselves that.
Yeah. And that's where the misinterpretation comes in. And that's why I think this is such a toxic positivity does my nut. It really does. Nothing, I don't say nothing, but it seriously seriously irritates me, because I just, it's so kind of, it's so inauthentic, isn't it? It's like, and it gives off the wrong message. It's like, like you were saying, negative emotion. There is no negative emotion. There is no such thing as a negative emotion. Every single emotion serves a purpose. And I often refer to the film Inside Out with my clients because I think it's just such a good example, isn't it, of teaching kids all your emotions have a place. They all serve a purpose.
Yep.
And we need all of them. You know, you can't try and block one of them out and pretend that that's okay. We need them all. They all have a purpose. There is no such thing as a negative emotion. But if we're taught that sadness or anger or, you know, anxiety are negative things, we grow up to fear them. And so rather than face them, we just happy face and everything's smiley and everything's sunshine and lemons, when really what's going on inside is like, you know, and we don't know how to deal with that. Yeah. And that, I think, is the kind of, and I say danger in a loose term, but that's the problem with throwing these sorts of terms around without care, I think, is what I want to say there.
So I think that brings me to a really nice moment. It's a new segment called Quick Reactions, right? Where I'm going to I went on a little hunt on social media and I did #AuthenticSelf to see what things would pop up. I'm going to share them with you, and I'd like your quick response. And we'll discuss, what do we think of this?
Be real, be authentic, be you. Again, I mean, what does that mean? Most people think they are being real. Most people think they are being authentic, don't they? It's not like the majority of people don't walk around thinking, well, I'm, you know, lying about my entire existence. Right. That's, you know, something that generally happens later on in life when you realize that maybe the life that you've lived hasn't quite been the one that you want, the one that you kind of maybe wanted to live for whatever reason. Pressures from your parents to take up a certain profession, pressures from your tribe. You know, as a teenager, the most important thing for our survival is for us to fit in, right? Yeah. So we tend to adapt to our tribe. That doesn't mean you're being inauthentic. It just means that survival instinct is the voice, you know, is the part that's shouting loudest.
Exactly. And I think things like this, it's getting to be people to feel bad about who they just are, i.e. like, now I can't just go and like do my best to fit in with the tribe. I now have to analyze as well and go, yeah, but should I be doing that? And now I have to feel uncomfortable about wanting to fit in. I can't just do what I was always doing. So I think it lacks, and it's also just a bit crappy. It's just a bit of a, let's just put something out that sounds profound and see if people share it. And it does make me, just because I have that sort of character where I like to prod and poke and just disturb people, it makes me want to put out one with swirly writing saying the opposite: be unreal, be inauthentic, be someone else, just to see what happens.
We don't say yes authentically, we say yes resentfully, and that leads to far more problems than if we'd said no in the first place. I don't dislike this one. I really dislike the design because it's like really messing with my eyes and my head.
It's very hypnotic though.
It is. It's like really kind of taking me to some weird places.
Yeah.
I don't dislike this one because there is truth in it, isn't it? And I think it's a bit like what you were saying about your daughter. If she doesn't feel like going somewhere, then, and us as adults, how often is you get invited somewhere and you really don't want to go? We were having a conversation about weddings, and you told me about a friend of yours, and it's common knowledge, it's commonplace, right? That a lot of people end up, you know, the wedding doesn't end up being about them and what they want, right? So you have all of these people coming to your wedding that you haven't seen for years. You may have never have met them. You don't know who they are. And then you spend most of the night kind of pleasing, you know, the people that you've never met before or that you hardly know, in a wedding with 300, 400, 500 people. I don't know, in some cultures, I mean, there are thousands of people at a wedding, like in China and India, and huge weddings with people that the bride and groom mostly have no idea who they are. And that's quite a big event to be saying yes. What was the quote? To be saying yes
resentfully.
You know, that's supposed to be a joyful day for you. And if you're saying yes resentfully, inviting people that you don't really want there, how is that going to impact your experience at your own wedding? And I chose not to do that. I will be very clear. My wedding, there was no one there that I didn't want there. No one. And I refused to send out an invitation to anyone I didn't want at that wedding. Yep. So we had a small wedding in comparison to what it probably should have been. And, but that was it. It was only people that I wanted there. And I was comfortable with that. I was more comfortable making that decision than making the decision to invite people that I didn't want there.
Yeah. And people talk about like duty invites, this idea like it's a duty invite. I have to invite them. Otherwise, they'll be offended. And that's really interesting because I think there's this understanding boundaries, psychologically speaking, of like, what's my business? And what's your business? Like whether you're offended is actually nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
That's entirely on you.
Yeah.
And I think, and it can seem a bit harsh and brutal sometimes, when people say, well, I'll be disappointed if you don't do X, Y, Z, and sometimes I have said things to people, things like, yes, that's right. You will be.
Yes.
Because like the point being is that your response has like, that's on you.
Yeah.
And it's nothing to do with me.
Yeah, it's a bit like irritating guy over there, It's yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And we do it every day. We do these things every day. I mean, we're kind of trained to be people pleasers, aren't we? Again, it sort of goes back to the tribal thing. We need to be accepted by our tribe to survive. But that kind of goes out the window when you're an adult. That's valid when you're a teenager. But because it's become so ingrained and we've become so conditioned in that way, we forget that when we're an adult, our survival doesn't depend on the tribe.
Absolutely.
And so we've kind of got this ingrained thing where we need to be people pleasers. And, somebody invites you out to dinner or to the pub for a drink and you don't want to go. And I know plenty of people that would never say no because they don't want to offend or it's rude or this, that and the other. I learned years ago to say, do you know what? I don't feel like going out tonight. I don't feel like being around people tonight. Or, we've made arrangements, but I'm just not in the mood, and people
or heaven forbid, how about this one? Just no, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, why not?
Just don't fancy it. Yeah.
Just no. Like, there doesn't even have to be a reason.
The unleashing of my authentic self will often require the collapse of whoever else I was trying to be. I've got to be honest, Howard, that one kind of speaks to me. It's a bit like what we've touched on already. We, especially in our teenage years, we tend to adapt and mold to be part of a tribe, don't we? To be a certain way, whatever tribe that is, whatever shape, form and colour that comes in, we need to fit into a group of people. It may be that as we get older, that persona, if you like, and I don't mean that in a demeaning way at all, but that persona no longer feels right for us. And so in a sense, when we feel ready to sort of let that go, it may be that there is this kind of sensation of almost kind of collapsing of you, of who you fit, of who you think you are.
So I do get it, and that take on it. My only thought about it is that this idea of whoever else I was trying to be, it's almost implied as though that the whoever else that they were trying to be that's now collapsed was somehow bad, or it was like a fool's errand, or it was a folly to be that. But the reality of it is that my guess is at the time when you were, and if we look at how you were, you didn't see it that way. You were still just trying to be you, and that you was someone who felt right at the time to want to fit in or to want to be accepted, or to have inner conflict about where, and that was being authentically you. So it wasn't like, so this idea of like, we're now going to unleash the authentic self as though you've been like, you've always been someone else your whole life until now.
Yeah.
I think is, that's the bit. It kind of it sort of embeds this idea that the story I was living a lie, I don't think is a helpful narrative and isn't always true. It's just like I am growing though and changing over time, and that's a good thing. And I'm always growing and changing over time, but it doesn't belittle or berate any of the past choices I've made. It's just been who I've been and the journey that I'm going through.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I think that's a good correction there. I'm not a fan of the imagery, but anyway, we'll move on from that. Authentic self. Within each person resides a compelling and extraordinary aspect of our inner nature. I think that's very much what I was talking about before. You know, this idea of tapping into your kind of, you know, pure unaltered emotions without judgment, without the need to change them, without the need for them to be something else. That's how I interpret that.
That's interesting. I see it as a bit bullshitty. Just, it's like the authentic self. Within each person resides a compelling and extraordinary aspect of our inner nature that is composed of the pure, unadulterated self. It's basically saying your authentic self is composed of your self.
Then we could go, I mean, this could go into the whole sort of, you know, what is the self, really? And that's a whole other episode.
Yeah. That's because I'm not sure that I even buy into self as a concept, and the whole of self is a story. Which is, I think, another layer of why I get a bit triggered when I see authentic self, because if you fundamentally don't believe that there is a self, there's just awareness, which is separate from the story that we give ourselves of this is who we are. We sort of place awareness on thoughts and constructs and stories, and then label it as that's me. And this idea of like, these images of what I don't want to be doing, I've labeled as my inauthentic self. And these images over here of me living with love and light, with total positivity all the time, I'm going to label those as that's authentic self. That's who I want to be. That's what I was made for. Rather than just all being just awareness.
I've got a friend, lovely, really, really lovely girl, and she is joy and happiness. She is joy and happiness most of the time until you get underneath that and you see, you know, you see the kind of the, I don't want to say realness, like the kind of the reality of what lies beneath. You know, there is a layer of sadness, there is a layer of, you know, hurt and in her past and things that need working. Anyway, she's got a teenage daughter, and she was telling me about her teenage daughter who's sometimes grumpy in the morning and wants no one to be in her space or in her face. And my friend is like, all happy, joy, up in her face in the morning, and like, come on, up you get. And she's like, no, can you just go away and leave me? Like, no, happy, joy, off we go. And I was like, let her be moody, let her be grumpy. There's no problem with it. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you were my mum going happy, joy when I was in a bad mood, I'd probably punch you in the face. Just let her be. It's fine. You know, she's going to experience she needs to experience all of the different emotions. We don't need to kind of normalize joy and happiness as the only acceptable way of feeling.
Yeah, or that, like, does every cloud have to have a silver lining?
Be whoever you want to be, choose to live authentically. Yeah. I mean,
I don't really know what that means in terms of, as though, like, no one chooses to live inauthentically, as we joked about earlier. No one chooses to go, I'm just trying to fit in. Or I'm, you know, so the idea of choosing to live authentically, how is that really any different than choosing to just have the feelings that you naturally have and are going through?
And be whoever you want to be. I mean, it would be nice to be Michelle Obama for a day, or... Yeah,
well, also, I think this speaks of this is a bit like, you know, the American dream. We're all told that we can be anything we want to be. And as if we believe it, and we can achieve it. Well, I'll be honest, and I don't think I've ever said this publicly, but I really wanted to be a 6'7" black basketball player. I think it's just like the coolest thing. But I'm 5'7", white. Not going to happen. So, yeah, I mean, I'd like to be that, but I'm not. And I think that's okay as well. And to accept the things that I am and the things that I'm not. And to...
For this one, I was told I wasn't authentic enough. And doesn't that photo just look authentic?
Absolutely. Not photoshopped. No, and that's how people normally sit, with an empty cup.
Yes.
There's nothing even in it. It's just empty, you know. Go on then. What do you reckon?
Authentic by whose standards?
That's
I mean,
exactly.
who is needing you to be a certain way to come to you and say you're not being authentic enough? And I did tell you this the other day. I was working with a coach a year or so ago, and she kept saying, "You're not showing up properly. You're not being authentic enough. You know, you're not." And I was like, well, "What is it that you need? You know, what is it that you need me to be doing to think that I'm showing up authentically? You know, it's like I'm not crying and I'm just, you know, I'm here, I'm showing up, I'm present and I'm doing, but I'm not, you know, in bags of tears every session." And she obviously needed her clients to be going through a process of, you know, kind of extreme turmoil and pain and floods of tears in order for her to be convinced that you were showing up authentically. I mean, what a load of bollocks.
It's like she has this idea of what authentic to her means X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
And unless you're demonstrating that, you're not authentic.
Yeah.
But it's just ludicrous. But how often do we do that, or people do that in their lives, where they essentially project outwards and go, I think this is how it should be, and you're not displaying that. And a really good example of this is so I can't remember who it was now, a comedian, and I really liked what he said. And I love comedy because some comedians, they can say stuff that's funny, but so pinpoint accurate at going to the nub of some issue. And this guy went, you know what the difference between a maniac and a moron is? A maniac is anyone that drives faster than you, and a moron's anyone that drives slower.
Yeah.
Which I love, because it goes right to the heart of this idea of what we do, which is we tend to put ourselves from a totally objective and godlike perspective in the position of I am normal, I am perfect, and the way I do this is absolutely how it should be. Therefore, everyone else is wrong. It's like these are the standards. So road rage comes from this, where it's essentially people mandating the standards by which you should use the roads are the ones that I set.
Yes, I know.
And it's like applying that kind of thinking to being authentic.
Yeah.
I have decided what authenticity means.
Yeah.
It means love and light, and you're not demonstrating that. Where's your authentic self? So yeah, I think it's odious is a good word.
Yes.
So I hope you enjoyed it. As always, if you've got any comments or you think we totally missed the point, then let us know in the comments below. And if you got value from it, that would be great to hear from you too. And as always, click subscribe, make sure you tune in, and I hope this has been useful.